Alrighty, welcome back to Fraggoth Reads. I am the reader, Fraggoth, and today we're going to be doing some more of The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. Last time, oh shoot, I shouldn't have said the thing about Kenzo Isozaki, because that's not going to get followed up on today. That will be when I next have time, which will be, I think, Thursday? That sounds right. I think it's Thursday. Where are you? I believe that's what I committed to. Yeah. It would be Tuesday, but unfortunately I have a eye appointment, so I won't be able, and it's right when we're doing this, so I will not be able to make it. So our plucky, intrepid, stalwart, mighty hero, Raul Endymion, is laid low, nay, nearly felled, by his greatest foe yet, kidney stones. Fortunately, the people of the Amoiete Spectrum Helix, living on Vitus-Gray-Balianus B, are more than happy to help him. They are very kind folks, with an interesting sort of religion, if you want to call it that, but very decent sorts. The planet has a pretty light Pax presence, but unfortunately for Raul, they do have to contact a Pax medic in order to get him some help, which they do. They put him under truth tell, and everything he says sounds absolutely crazy. You know, crazy things like, oh, I've been traveling the Farcaster webway, which, has been shut down for the last 300 years. Oh, the last planet I was on was Old Earth. So they have him down as a loony and a nut who's done too many drugs and is now suffering from kidney stones. So I forgot to turn off the stream starting soon thing. So they're like, well, just sit tight. We're doing military exercises. We'll pick you up and put you in prison or whatever for however long. They don't know that he doesn't have a cruciform. But they give him drugs to help with the kidney stone issue, namely painkillers. And that's about where we leave him. Let's see. The crusade proceeds apace, and that is where we will pick up. The Kenzo Isozaki thing. So Kenzo Isozaki, who is the CEO of the Pax Mercantilus, however it's pronounced. I should really look it up, but I'm too lazy. Or have been too distracted, I should say. I'm not too lazy, I've just been distracted. He has gone out for a secret meeting in Pacem's asteroid belt, where he will not be eavesdropped upon, with a certain someone. We do not know who that is, and he suddenly receives the most ominous of sounds: knock, knock, knocking on the outside of an airlock where nobody should be. But back to the crusade. Yeah, I think that does it. Thanks for tuning in, Nicole Berlino. Happy Sunday indeed. We will occasionally be doing Sundays. Now, it's looking like those are going to be a frequent occurrence. All right, so let me get a little water sloshed in me, and let's get cracking. Another short-ish one, but still pretty beefy. The chapters are longer now in this book. Alrighty, give me one sec here, and we'll get rocking and rolling.
crazy though this sounds, it helps if I turn on the microphone. 9. By the time they translated into their 5th ouster system, Task Force Gideon had its slaughter down to a science. Father Captain DeSoya knew from his courses in military history at Pax Fleet Command School that almost all space engagements fought more than half an AU from a planet, moon, asteroid, or strategic point source in space were entered into by mutual agreement. He remembered that the same had been true of primitive ocean navies on pre-Hegera Old Earth, where most great naval battles had been fought in sight of land in the same aquatic killing grounds, with only the technology of the surface ships changing slowly. Greek trireme to steel-hulled battleship. Aircraft carriers with their long-range attack planes had changed that forever, allowing armadas to strike at each other far out to sea and at great distances. But these battles were far different from the legendary naval engagements where capital ships had slugged it out within visible range of one another. Even before cruise missiles, tactical nuclear warheads, and crude charged particle weapons had forever ended the era of the ocean-going surface combatant, the sea navies of old Earth had grown nostalgic for the days of blazing broadsides and crossing the T. Space war had brought a return to such mutually agreed-upon engagements. The great battles of the hegemony days, whether the ancient internecine wars with General Horace Glennon Height and his ilk, or the centuries of warfare between web worlds and ouster swarms, had usually been waged close to a planet or spaceborne Farcaster portal, and distances between the combatants were absurdly short. Hundreds of thousands of clicks, often tens of thousands, frequently less than that, given the light years and parsecs traveled by the warring parties. But this closing on the enemy was necessary given the time it took a fusion-powered laser lance, a CPB, or ordinary attack missiles to cross even one AU, 7 minutes for light to crawl the distance between would-be killer and target, much longer for even the highest boost missile, where the hunt, chase, and kill point could take days of seek and countermeasure, attack and parry. Ships with C-plus capability had no incentive to hang around in enemy space waiting for these seeker missiles, and the Church-sponsored restriction on AIs in warheads made the effectiveness of these weapons problematic at best. So the shape of space battles over the centuries of the hegemony had been simple. Fleets translating into disputed space and finding other translating fleets or more static in-system defenses, a quick closing to more lethal distances, a brief but terrible exchange of energies, and the inevitable retreat of the more savaged forces, or total destruction if the defending forces had nowhere to retreat, followed by consolidation of gains by the winning fleet. Technically, the slower ships DeSoya had served in previously had a powerful tactical advantage over the instantaneous drive Archangel cruisers. Revival from cryogenic fugue state took only hours at worst, minutes at best, so the captain and crew of a Hawking drive ship could be ready to fight shortly after translating from C+. With the Archangels, and even with the papal dispensation for the accelerated and risky 2-day resurrection cycles, it was 50 standard hours or more before the human elements of the ships were ready to do battle. Theoretically, this gave a great advantage to the defenders. Theoretically, the Pax could have optimized the use of Gideon-drive ships by having uncrewed craft piloted by AIs flick into enemy space, wreak havoc, and flick out again before the defenders knew that they were under attack. But such theory did not apply here. Autonomous intelligences capable of such advanced fuzzy logic would never be allowed by the Church. More importantly, Pax Fleet had designed attack strategies to meet the requirements of resurrection so that no advantage would be surrendered to defenders. Simply put, no battles were to be fought by mutual agreement. The 7 Archangels had been designed to descend upon the enemy like the mailed fist of God, and that was precisely what they were doing now. In the first 3 Task Force Gideon incursions into outer space, Mother Captain Stone's ship, the Gabriel, translated first and decelerated hard in system, drawing all long-range electromagnetic, neutrino, and hard in system... Oh, that's repeating the same line I just started. In the first 3 Task Force Gideon incursions into outer space, Mother Captain Stone's ship, the Gabriel, translated first and decelerated hard in system, drawing all long-range electromagnetic, neutrino, and other sensor probes. The restricted AIs aboard Gabriel were sufficient to catalog the position and identity of all defensive positions and population centers in the system, while simultaneously monitoring the sluggish in-system movement of all ouster attack and merchant vehicles. 30 minutes later, the Uriel, Raphael, Remiel, Sariel, Michael, and Raguel would translate in system. Dropping to only 3/4 light speed, the task force would be moving like bullets compared to the tortoise velocities of the accelerating ouster torch ships. Receiving Gabriel's intelligence and targeting data via tight beam burst, the task force would open fire with weaponry that held no respect for the limitations of light speed. The improved Hawking Drive Hyper-K missiles would wink into existence among enemy ships and above population centers, some using velocity and precise aiming to destroy targets, others detonating in carefully shaped but promiscuous plasma or thermonuclear blasts. At the same instant, recoverable Hawking Drive high-velocity probes would jump to target points and translate into real space, radiating conventional lance beams and CPBs like so many lethal sea urchins, destroying anything and everything within a 100,000-click radius. Most terribly, the shipborne death beams would slice outward from the task force archangels like invisible scythes, propagating along the Hawking Drive wakes of probes and missiles, and translating into real space as surely as the terrible swift sword of God. Countless trillions of synapses were fried and scrambled in an instant. Tens of thousands of ousters died without knowing that they were under attack. And then the Gideon task force would come back in system on 1,000-kilometer tails of flame, closing in for the final kill. Each of the 7 star systems to be attacked had been probed by instantaneous drive drones, the presence of ousters confirmed, preliminary targets assigned. Each of the 7 star systems had a name, usually just a new revised general catalog alphanumerical designation, but the command team aboard HHS Uriel had given the 7 systems target names coded after the 7 archdemons mentioned in the Old Testament. Father Captain DeSoya thought it a bit much, all this Kabbalistic numerology. 7 archangels, 7 target systems, 7 archdemons, 7 deadly sins. But he soon fell into the habit of talking about the targets in this shorthand. The target systems were Belphegor, Sloth, Leviathan, Envy, Beelzebub, Gluttony, Satan, Anger, Asmodeus, Lechery, Mammon, Avarice, and Lucifer, Pride. Belphegor had been a red dwarf system that reminded DeSoya of Barnard's star system, but instead of the lovely, fully terraformed Barnard's world floating close to the sun, Belphegor's only planet was a gas giant resembling Barnard's star's forgotten child, Whirl. There were true military targets around this unnamed gas giant. Refueling stations for the oyster... I knew I was going to do that eventually. The oysters. Refueling stations for the ouster swarm torch ships en route to attack the Pax's Great Wall. Gigantic dip ships. Yes, dip ships. Gigantic dip ships that shuttled the gases from the world to orbit, repair docks, and orbital shipyards by the dozen. DeSoya had Raphael attack these without hesitation, slagging them to orbital lava. Gideon found most of the true Ouster population centers floating in the Trojan points beyond the gas giant, scores of small orbital forests filled with tens of thousands of space-adapted angels, most opening their force field wings to the weak red sunlight in panic at the task force's approach. The 7 archangels laid waste to these delicate ecostructures, destroying all of the forests and shepherd asteroids and watering comets, burning the fleeing space-adapted Ouster angels like putting so many moths to a flame, and all without slowing significantly between entrance and exit translation points. The second system, Leviathan, despite its impressive name, had been a serious B-type white dwarf with only a dozen or so Ouster asteroids huddled close to its pale fire. Here there were none of the obvious military targets that Desoya had attacked so willingly in the Belphegor system. The asteroids were undefended, probably birthing rocks and hollowed-out pressurized environments for ousters who had not chosen to adapt to vacuum and hard radiation. Task Force Gideon swept them with death beams and passed on. The third system, Beelzebub, was an Alpha Centauri sea-like red dwarf, devoid of worlds or colonies, with only a single Ouster military base swinging in the darkness some 30 AUs out and 57 swarm ships caught in the act of refueling or refitting. 39 of these warships, ranging in size and armament from tiny ram scouts to an Orion-class attack carrier, were fit to fight and flung themselves at Task Force Gideon. The battle lasted 2 minutes and 18 seconds. All 57 Ouster ships and the base complex were turned to gas molecules or lifeless sarcophagi. No Archangels were damaged in the exchange. The task force moved on. The fourth system, Satan, held no ships, only breeding colonies scattered as far out as the Oort cloud. Gideon spent 11 days in this system, putting Lucifer's angels to the torch. The fifth system, Asmodeus, centered by a pleasant little K-type orange dwarf not unlike Epsilon Eridani, sent waves of in-system torch ships to the defense of its populated asteroid belt. The waves were burned and blasted away with an economy born of practice. The Gabriel reported 82 inhabited rocks in the belt, harboring a population estimated at 1.5 million adapted and unadapted ousters. 81 of the asteroids were destroyed or death-beamed from a great distance. Then Admiral Aldecalde ordered prisoners taken. Task Force Gideon decelerated in a long 4-day ellipse that brought them back to the belt and its sole remaining inhabited rock, a potato-shaped asteroid less than 4 clicks long and a click across at its widest, cratered point. Doppler radar showed that it was orbiting and tumbling in random patterns understood only by the gods of chaos, but that it was turning on its axis in a carefully orchestrated 1/10 G rotisserie mode. Deep radar showed that it was hollow. Probes told that it was inhabited by as many as 10,000 ousters. Analysis suggested that it was a birthing rock. 6 unarmed rock hoppers flung themselves at the task force. Uriel turned them into plasma at a distance of 86,000 clicks. 1,000 Ouster angels, some of them armed with low-yield energy weapons or recoilless rifles, opened force field wings and flew toward the distant Pax ships in long, tacking ellipses along the crest of the solar wind. Their velocity was so slow that it would have taken days to cover the distance. Gabriel was given the task of burning them away with 1,000 winks of coherent light. Tight beams flicked on between the archangels. Raphael and Gabriel acknowledged orders and closed to within 1,000 clicks of the silent asteroid. Sally ports opened, and 12 tiny figures, 6 from each ship, caught the light from the orange dwarf star as Swiss Guard commandos, Marines, and troopers jetted toward the rock. There was no resistance. The troopers found 2 shielded airlock portals. With precise timing, they blasted the outer doors and entered in teams of 3. Yes, it is, Gregorius. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 2 standard months since my last confession. Go ahead. Father, today's action, it bothers me, Father. Yes? It feels wrong. Father Captain DeSoya was silent. He had watched Sergeant Gregorius's attack on the virtual tactical channels. He had debriefed the men after the mission. Now he knew he was going to hear it again in the darkness of the confessional. Go ahead, Sergeant, he said softly. Aye, sir, said the sergeant on the other side of the partition. Aye, Father. Father Captain DeSoya heard the big man take a breath. We came onto the rock with no opposition, began Sergeant Gregorius. Me and the 5 young ones, We were in tight beam contact with Sergeant Klug's squad from the Gabriel, and of course with Commanders Barneshaven and Uchikawa. DeSoya remained silent in his part of the confessional booth. The booth was sectional, meaning meant to be stored away when the Raphael was under boost or combat stations, which was most of the time, but now it smelled of wood and sweat and velvet and sin, as all real confessionals did. The Father Captain had found this half-hour during the last stage of their climb toward Translation Point for the 6th Ouster system, Mammon, and offered the crew time for confession, but only Sergeant Gregorius had come forward. So when we landed, sir, Father, I had the laddies in my squad take the South Polar airlock just like in The Sims. We blew the doors as easily as you please, Father, and then activated our own fields for the tunnel fighting. DeSoya nodded. Swiss Guard fighting suits had always been the best in the human universe, capable of surviving, moving, and fighting in air, water, hard vacuum, hard radiation, slug assault, energy lance assault, and high explosive environment up to the kiloton yield range, but the new commando suits carried their own Class 4 containment fields and were able to piggyback on the ship's more formidable fields. The Ousters hit us in there, Father, fighting in the dark maze of the access tunnels. Some of them were space-adapted creatures, sir, angels without their wings extended. But most of them were just low-G adepts in skin suits. Hardly any armour to speak of at all, Father. They tried using lance and rifle and ray on us, but they were using basic night goggles to amplify the dim glow from the rocks, sir, and we saw 'em first with our filters. Saw 'em first, and shot 'em first. Sergeant Gregorius took another breath. It only took us a few minutes to fight our way to the inner locks, Father. All the ousters who tried to stop us in the tunnels ended up floating there. Inside, Father Captain DeSoya waited. Inside, Father. Well. Gregorius cleared his throat. Both squads blew the inner doors at the same instant, sir. North and south poles at once. The repeater globes we left behind in the tunnels relayed the tight beam transmissions just fine, so we were never out of touch with Klug's squad, nor with the ships, as you know, Father. There were fail-safes on the inner doors, just as we figured, but we blew those as well. And the emergency membranes a second later. The inside of the rock was all hollow, Father. Well, we knew that, of course. But I'd never been inside a berthing asteroid before, Father. Many a military rock, aye, but never a pregnancy one. DeSoya waited. It was about 1 click across with lots of their spidery low-G bamboo towers taking up much of the centre space, Father. The inner shell wasn't spherical or smooth, but more or less followed the shape of the outside of the rock, you know. Potato, said Father Captain DeSoya. Yes, sir. Oh, and all pitted and cratered on the inside, too, Father. Lots of caves and grottos everywhere, like dens for the pregnant ousters, I suppose. DeSoya nodded in the darkness and glanced at his chronometer, wondering if the usually concise sergeant was going to get to the perceived sins in this account before they had to stow the confessional for C+ translation. It must have been pure chaos for the ousters, Father. What with a cyclone howling as the place depressurized, all the atmosphere flowing out of the 2 blasted airlocks like water out of a bathtub drain, the air full of dirt and debris, and ousters blowing away like so many leaves in the storm. We had our external suit phones on, Father, and the noise was unbelievable till the air got too thin to carry it. Wind roaring, ousters screaming, the air lances and our lances crackling like so many lightning rods, plasma grenades going off, and the sound bouncing back at us in that big rock cavern, the echoes going on for minutes. It was loud, Father. Yes, said Father Captain de Soya in the darkness. Sergeant Gregorius took another breath. Anyway, Father, the order has been to bring in 2 samples of everything. Adult males, space-adapted, unadapted. Adult females, pregnant and not pregnant. A couple of Ouster kids, pre-puberty and infants. Both sexes. So Klug's team and ours got busy, stunning and bagging them. There was just enough gravity on the inner surface of the rock, 1/10 G, to keep the bags in place where we left them. There was a moment of silence. Father Captain de Soya was just about to speak, to bring this confession to a close, when Sergeant Gregorius whispered through the screen and darkness separating them. Sorry, Father. I know you know all this. It's hard to... Anyway, this was the bad part, Father. Most of the Ousters who weren't modified, space-adapted, were dead or dying at this point, from decompression or lance fire or grenades. We didn't use the death beam ones issued to us. Neither Klug nor I said anything to the lads. Just none of us used the things. Now those adapted Ousters went angel, their bodies turning all shiny as they activated their personal force fields. They couldn't fully extend their wings in there, of course, and it wouldn't have done any good if they had. No sunlight to catch, and the 1/10 G was too much for them to overcome if there had been any solar wind. But they went angel anyway. Some of them tried to use their wings as weapons against us. Sergeant Gregorius made a rough sound that might have been a parody of a chuckle. We had class 4 field. We had class 4 fields, Father, and they were batting at us with those gossamer wings. Anyway, we burned them away, sent them from each squad. Oh God, I don't know why we converted to Russian there. Anyway, we burned them away, sent 3 from each squad out with the bagged specimens, and Klug and I each took our remaining 2 lads to clear out the caverns as ordered. De Soya waited. There was less than a minute before he would have to end confession. We knew it was a birthing rock, Father. We knew. Everybody knows that the Ousters, even the ones who've turned the machines loose in their cells and blood and who don't look anything like human, they haven't learned how to have their females carry and bear children in pure 0G and hard radiation, Father. We knew it was a birthing rock when we went in the goddamn asteroid. I'm sorry, Father. De Soya stayed silent. But even so, Father, those caverns were like homes. Beds and cubbies and flat-screen vid sets and kitchens. Not things we're used to thinking Ousters have, Father. But most of those caves were... nurseries, said Father Captain de Soya. Aye, sir. Nurseries. Wee beds with wee babies in 'em. Not Ouster monsters, Father. Not those pale, shiny things we fight against. Not those damned Lucifer's angels with wings 100 clicks across in the starlight. Just babies. By the hundreds, Father. By the thousands. Cavern after cavern. Most of the rooms there had depressurized already, killing the little ones where they lay. Some of the little bodies had been blown out in the depressurization, but most of them were tucked in tight. Some of the rooms were still airtight, though, Father. We blew our way in. Mothers, women in robes, pregnant women with their wild hair flying in the 1/10 G. They attacked us with their fingernails and teeth, Father. We ignored them until the windstorms blew them out or they died of choking. But some of the infants, scores of them, Father, were in those little plastic respirator cases. Incubators, said Father Captain de Soya. Aye, whispered Sergeant Gregorius, his voice tiring at last. And we tight-beamed back. What did they want us to do with them? With all the scores and scores of baby Ousters in these incubators? And Commander Barnes-Avon beamed back. To continue on, whispered Father Captain de Soya. Aye, Father. So we followed orders, Sergeant. So we used the last of our grenades in those nurseries, Father. And when the plasma grenades were gone, we lanced those incubators. Room after room, cavern after cavern. The plastic melted around the babes, covered them. Blankets ignited. The boxes must have been fed with pure O2, Father, because a lot of them went up like grenades themselves. We had to activate our suit fields, Father, and even so, it took me 2 hours to clean my combat armor. But most of the incubators didn't explode, Father. They just burned like dry tinder, burned like torches, everything in them burning bright like little furnaces. And by now all the rooms and caverns were in vacuum, but the boxes, the little incubators, they still had atmosphere while they burned. And we turned off our outside phones, sir. All of us did. But somehow we could still hear the crying and the screams through the containment fields and our helmets. I can still hear them, Father. Sergeant, said de Soya, his voice hard and flat with command. Aye, sir. You were following orders, Sergeant. We were all following orders. His Holiness has long since decreed that ousters have surrendered their humanity to nanodevices they release in their blood, to the changes they made with their chromosomes. But the screams, Father! Sergeant! The Vatican Council and the Holy Father have decreed that this crusade is necessary if the human family is to be saved from the ouster threat. You were given orders. You obeyed them. We are soldiers. Aye, sir, whispered the sergeant in the darkness. We have no more time, Sergeant. We will talk about this at a later time. For now, I want you to do penance. Not for being a soldier and following orders, but for doubting those orders. 50 Hail Marys, Sergeant, and 100 Our Fathers. And I want you to pray about this. Pray very hard for understanding. Aye, Father. Now say a sincere act of contrition. Quickly now. When the whispered words began to come through the screen, Father Captain de Soya lifted his hand in benediction as he gave absolution. Ego te absolvo. 8 minutes later, the Father Captain and his crew all lay back in their acceleration couches/resurrection creches as Raphael's Gideon drive activated, carrying them instantaneously to target system Mammon by way of terrible death and slow, painful rebirth. So the crusade proceeds with calculated atrocity. The Grand Inquisitor had died and gone to hell. It was only his second death and resurrection, and he had enjoyed neither experience. And Mars was hell. John Domenico Cardinal Mustafa and his contingent of 21 Holy Office administrators and security people, including his indispensable aide, Father Farrell, had traveled to Old Earth System in the new Archangel starship Jibril, and had been given a generous 4 days after resurrection to recover and regroup mentally before beginning their work on the surface of Mars itself. The Grand Inquisitor had read and been briefed enough on the Red Planet to form an unassailable opinion. Mars was hell. Actually, Father Farrell responded the first time the Grand Inquisitor had mentioned his conclusion aloud about Mars being hell, one of the other planets in this system, Venus, better fits that description, Your Excellency. Boiling temperatures, crushing pressures, lakes of liquid metal, winds like rocket exhausts. Shut up, the Grand Inquisitor said with a tired turn of his hand. Mars, the first world ever colonized. Mars, the first world ever colonized by the human race, despite its low rating of 2.5 on the old Solmev scale. Excuse me, one sec. Sorry about that. Mars, the first world ever colonized by the human race despite its low rating of 2.5 on the old Solmev scale, the first attempted terraforming, the first failed terraforming, a world bypassed after the black hole death of old Earth because of the Hawking drive, because of the imperatives of the Hegera, because no one wanted to live on the rusty sphere of permafrost when the galaxy offered a near infinite number of prettier, healthier, more viable worlds. For centuries after the death of old Earth, Mars had been such a backwater planet that the World Web had not established Farcaster portals there, a desert planet of interest only to the orphans of New Palestine. The legendary Colonel Fedman Kassad had been born in the Palestinian relocation camps there, Mustafa was surprised to learn. And to Zen Christians returning to Hellas Basin to reenact Master Schroeder's enlightenment at the Zen Massif. For a century or so, it had looked as if the huge terraforming project would work. Seas filled giant impact basins, and cyclad ferns proliferated along River Marineris. But then the setbacks came. There were no funds to fight the entropy, and the next 60,000-year-long ice age arrived. At the height of the World Web civilization, the hegemony's military wing, Force, had brought Farcasters to the Red World and honeycombed habitats into... Oh, I see. At the height of the World Web civilization, the hegemony's military wing, Force, had brought Farcasters to the Red World and honeycombed habitats into much of the huge volcano, Mons Olympus, for their Olympic command school. Mars's isolation from web trade and culture served Force well, and the planet had remained a military base until the fall of the Farcasters. In the century after the fall, remnants of Force had formed a vicious military dictatorship, the so-called Martian War Machine, which extended its rule as far as the Centauri and Tau Ceti systems, and might well have become the seed crystal for a second interstellar empire if the Pax had not arrived, quickly subduing the Martian fleets, driving the war machine back to old Earth systems, sending the dispossessed warlords into hiding in the ruins of Force orbital bases and in the old tunnels under Mons Olympus, replacing the war machine's presence in old Earth system with Pax fleet bases in the asteroid belt and among the Jovian moons, and finally sending missionaries and Pax governors to pacified Mars. There was little left on the Rust world for the missionaries to convert or the Pax administrators to govern. The air had grown thin and cold. The large cities had been plundered and abandoned. The great simoom, pole-to-pole dust storms had reappeared. Plague and pestilence stalked the icy deserts, decimating, or worse, the last bands of nomads descended from the once noble race of Martians. And little more than spindly brandy cactus now grew where the great apple orchards and fields of bradberries had long ago flourished. Bradberries, of course, being a delightful word pun. They are berries called Brad, not at all to be confused with Ray Bradbury. It's a joke. It's a literary giggle. Oddly, it was the downtrodden and much-abused Palestinians on the frozen Tharsis Plateau whose society had survived and thrived. The orphans of the ancient nuclear diaspora of AD 2038 had adapted to Mars's rough ways and extended their Islamic culture to many of the planet's surviving nomad tribes and free city-states by the time the Pax missionaries arrived. Refusing to submit to the ruthless Martian war machine for more than a century, the new Palestinians showed no interest now in surrendering autonomy to the Church. It was precisely in the Palestinian... tripping over my words. It was precisely in the Palestinian capital of Arafat Kafir that the Shrike had appeared and slaughtered hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people. The Grand Inquisitor conferred with his aides, met with Pax fleet commanders in orbit, and landed in Force. The main spaceport in the capital of St. Malachi was shut down to all but military traffic. No great loss, since no merchant or passenger dropships were scheduled in for a Martian week. 6 assault boats preceded the Grand Inquisitor's dropship, and by the time Cardinal Mustafa set foot on Martian soil, or Pax tarmac to be precise, 100 Swiss Guard and Holy Office commandos had ringed the spaceport. The official Martian welcoming delegation, including Archbishop Robeson and Governor Claire Palo, were searched and sonic probed before being allowed clearance. From the spaceport, the Holy Office group was whisked via ground car shuttles through decaying streets to the new Pax-built governor's palace on the outskirts of St. Malachi. Security was heavy. Besides the Grand Inquisitor's personal security force, the Pax Fleet Marines, the Governor's troopers, and the Archbishop's contingent of Swiss guards, there was a battle regiment of Home Guard armored infantry encamped around the palace. There, the Grand Inquisitor was shown evidence of the Shrike's presence 2 standard weeks earlier on the Tharsis Plateau. "This is absurd," said the Grand Inquisitor on the night before flying to the scene of the Shrike attack. "All these hollows and vid images are 2 standard weeks old or taken from high altitude. I see these few hollows of what must be the Shrike and some blurred scenes of carnage. I see photos of the Pax bodies and the militiamen found when first entering the town. But where are the local people? Where are the eyewitnesses? Where are the 2,700 citizens of Arafat Kafir?" "We don't know," said Governor Claire Palo. We reported to the Vatican via Archangel Drone, and when the drone returned, we were told not to tamper with the evidence," said Archbishop Robeson. "We were told to await your arrival." The Grand Inquisitor shook his head and held up a flat photo image. "And what is this?" he said. "A Pax Fleet base on the outskirts of Arafat Kafir. This spaceport is newer than St. Malachi's." "It is not Pax Fleet," said Captain Womack, captain of the Jibril and new commander of the Old Earth System Task Force. "Although we estimate that 30 to 50 dropships a day were using this facility during the week previous to the Shrike's appearance." 30 to 50 dropships a day, repeated the Grand Inquisitor, "and not Pax Fleet. Who then?" He scowled at Archbishop Robeson and the governor. "Mercantilus?" pressed the Grand Inquisitor when no one spoke. "No," said the Archbishop after another moment. "Not Mercantilus." The Grand Inquisitor folded his arms and waited. "The dropships were chartered by Opus Dei," said Governor Palo in a tiny voice. "For what purpose?" demanded the Grand Inquisitor. Only Holy Office guards were allowed in this suite of the palace, and they stood at 6-meter intervals along the stone wall. The governor opened her hands. "We do not know, Your Excellency." "Domenico," said the Archbishop, his voice quavering slightly, "we were told not to inquire." The Grand Inquisitor took an angry step forward. "Told not to? By whom? Who has the authority to order the presiding Archbishop and the Pax Governor of a world not to interfere?" His anger boiled through. "In the name of Christ, who has such power?" The Archbishop raised pained but defiant eyes toward Cardinal Mustafa. "In the name of Christ, precisely, Your Excellency. Those representing Opus Dei held official diskies from the Pontifical Commission for Justice and Peace," he said. "We were told that it was a security matter in Arafat Kafir. We were told that it was not our business. We were told not to interfere." The Grand Inquisitor felt his face flushing with barely subdued rage. "Security matters on Mars or anywhere else in the Pax are the responsibility of the Holy Office," he said flatly. "The Pontifical Commission for Justice and Peace has no charter here. Where are the representatives of the Commission? Why aren't they here for this meeting?" Governor Claire Palo raised a thin hand and pointed at the flat photo in the Grand Inquisitor's hand. "There, Your Excellency. There are the Commission authorities." Cardinal Mustafa looked down at the glossy photograph. Forms of white-clad bodies could be seen in the dusty red streets of Arafat Kafir. Even through the grain of the images, it was obvious that the bodies were mauled into grotesque forms and swollen from decomposition. The Grand Inquisitor spoke softly, fighting the urge to scream and then order these imbeciles tortured and shot. "Why," he asked softly, "haven't these people been resurrected and questioned?" Archbishop Robeson actually attempted a smile. "You will see that tomorrow, Your Excellency. It will be abundantly clear tomorrow." EMVs were useless on Mars. They used armored Pax security skimmers for their flight to Tharsis Plateau. Torch ships and the Jibril monitored their progress. Scorpion fighters flew space/air combat patrol. 200 clicks from the plateau, 5 squads of Marines dropped from the skimmers and flew ahead at low altitude, raking the area with acoustic probes and setting up firing positions. Nothing but the shifting sand moved in Arafat Kafir. The Holy Office security skimmers set down first, their landing legs settling into sand where grass had once grown on the oval city commons. The outer ships... Okay, let's try this again. The Holy Office security skimmers set down first, their landing legs settling into sand where grass had once grown on the oval city commons, the outer ships establishing and linking a Class 6 containment field that made the buildings around the plaza seem to shimmer in heat haze. The Marines had dropped into a defensive circle with the commons as their locus. Now the governor's Pax and Home Guard troops moved out to establish a second perimeter in the streets and alleys around the plaza. The Archbishop's 8 Swiss guardsmen secured the circle just outside the containment field. Finally, the Grand Inquisitor's Holy Office security force exploded down the skimmer ramps and established the inner perimeter of kneeling figures in black combat armor. "Clear," came the leading Marine sergeant's voice on the tactical channel. "Nothing moving or alive within a kilometer of Site 1, rasped the lieutenant of the Home Guard. "Bodies in the street." "Clear here," said the captain of the Swiss Guard. "Confirm nothing moving in Arafat Kafir except your people," came the voice of the captain of the Jibril. "Affirmative," said Holy Office Security Commander Browning. Feeling foolish and disgruntled, the Grand Inquisitor swept down the ramp and across the sandy commons. His mood was not lifted by the silly osmosis mask he had to wear, its circular boosterator slung over his shoulder like a loose medallion. Father Farrell, Archbishop Robeson, Governor Paulo, and a host of functionaries ran to keep up as Cardinal Mustafa strode by the kneeling security forms, and, with an imperious wave of his hand, ordered a portal cut in the containment field. He passed through over the protests of Commander Browning and the other forms in black armor who were scuttling to catch up. "Where is the first of—" began the Grand Inquisitor as he bounced down the narrow alley opposite the commons. He was still not used to the light gravity here. "Right around this corner," panted the Archbishop. "We should really wait for the outer fields to be," said Governor Paulo. "Here," said Father Farrell, pointing down the street onto which they had emerged. The group of 15 stopped so quickly that those aides and security people in the rear had to catch themselves before bumping into the VIPs in front. "Dear Lord," whispered Archbishop Robeson and crossed himself. Through the clear osmosis mask, his face was visibly white. "Christ," muttered Governor Claire Paulo. "I've seen the hollows and the photos for 2 weeks, but... Christ!" said Father Farrell, taking a step closer to the first body. The Grand Inquisitor joined him. He went to one knee in the red sand. The contorted form in the dirt looked as if someone had fashioned an abstract sculpture out of flesh, bone, and gristle. It would not have been recognizably human had it not been for the teeth gleaming in the wide-stretched mouth, and one hand lying nearby in the shifting Martian dust. After a moment, the Grand Inquisitor said, "Did scavengers do some or most of this? Carrion birds, perhaps? Rats?" "Negative," said Major Piet, the Governor's Pax Fleet ground force commander. "No birds on the Tharsis Plateau since the atmosphere started thinning 2 centuries ago. No rats, or any other moving thing, have been picked up by motion detectors since this happened." "The Shrike did this," said the Grand Inquisitor. "The Shrike did this," said the Grand Inquisitor. He did not sound convinced. He stood and moved to the second body. It might have been a woman. It looked as if it had been turned inside out and shredded. "And this?" "We think so," said Governor Paolo. "The militia that found all this brought out the security camera, which had that 38-second holo we've shown you." "That looked like a dozen shrikes killing a dozen people," said Father Farrell. "It was hazy." "That looked like a dozen shrikes killing a dozen people," said Father Farrell. "It was hazy." "There was a sandstorm," said Major Piet, "and there was only one shrike. We've studied the individual images. It simply moved through the crowd so quickly that it appeared to be multiple creatures." "Moved through the crowd," murmured the Grand Inquisitor. He stepped over a third body that might have been a child or small female. "Doing this." "Doing this," said Governor Paolo. She glanced at Archbishop Robeson, who had moved to a wall for support. There were 20 to 30 bodies in this section of the street. Father Farrell knelt and ran his gloved hand across the chest and into the chest cavity of the first cadaver. The flesh was frozen, as was the blood that fell in a black icefall. "And there was no sign of the cruciform?" he said softly. "And there was no sign of the cruciform?" he said softly. Governor Paolo shook her head. "Not in the 2 bodies the militia returned for resurrection. No sign of the cruciform whatsoever. If there had been any remnant at all, even a millimeter or node or bit of fiber in the brainstem or—" "We know that," snapped the Grand Inquisitor, ending the explanation.
"Very strange," said Bishop Erdl, the Holy Office's expert on resurrection technique. "To my knowledge, there has never been an instance where the body was left so intact where we could not find remnant of the cruciform in the corpse. Governor Paolo is correct, of course. Even the slightest bit of cruciform is all that is necessary for the sacrament of resurrection."
The Grand Inquisitor stopped to inspect a body that had been thrown against an iron railing hard enough to impale it at a dozen points. "It looks as if the Shrike was after the cruciforms. It tore every shred of them out of the bodies."
"Not possible," said Bishop Erdl. "Simply not possible. There are over 500 meters of microfiber in the cellular node extensions of—"
"Not possible," agreed the Grand Inquisitor. "But when we ship these bodies back, I'll wager that none are recoverable. The Shrike may have torn their hearts and lungs and throats out, but it was after their cruciforms." Security Commander Browning came around the corner with 5 troopers in black armor. "Your Excellency," he said on the tactical channel only the Grand Inquisitor could hear, "the worst is a block over. This way." The entourage followed the man in black armor, but slowly, reluctantly. They catalogued 362 bodies. Many were in the streets, but the majority were in buildings in the city or inside the sheds, hangars, and spacecraft at the new spaceport on the edge of Arafat Kafie. Holos were taken, and the Holy Office forensic teams took over, recording each site before taking the bodies back to the Pax base morgue outside of St. Malachi. It was determined that all of the bodies were off-worlders, i.e., there were no local Palestinians or native Martians among them. The spaceport intrigued the Pax fleet experts the most. 8 dropships serving the field itself, said Major Piet. That's a serious number. St. Malachi's spaceport uses only 2. He glanced up at the purple Martian sky. Assuming that the ships they were shuttling to and from had their own dropships, at least 2 each if they were freighters, then we're talking about serious logistics here. The Grand Inquisitor looked at Mars's Archbishop, but Robeson merely held his hands up.
We knew nothing of these operations, said the little man. As I explained before, it was an Opus Dei project.
Well, said the Grand Inquisitor, as far as we can tell, all of the Opus Dei personnel are dead. Truly, irrecoverably dead. So now it's a responsibility of the Holy Office. You don't have any idea what they built this port for? Heavy metals, perhaps? Some sort of mineral mining operation? Governor Paolo shook her head. The world has been mined for over 1,000 years. There are no heavy metals left worth shipping. No minerals worth a local salvage operation's time, much less Opus Dei's. Major Piet slipped his visor up and rubbed the stubble on his chin. Something was being shipped in quantity here, Your Excellencies. 8 dropships, a sophisticated grid system, automated security.
If the Shrike, or whatever it was, had not destroyed the computers and record systems, began Commander Browning.
Major Piet shook his head. It wasn't the Shrike. The computers had already been destroyed by shaped charges and tailored DNA viruses. He looked around the empty administrative building. Red sand had already found its way through portals and seams. It's my guess that these people destroyed their own records before the Shrike arrived. I think they were on the verge of clearing out. That's why the dropships were all in pre-launch mode, their onboard computers set to go. Father Farrell nodded. But all we have are the orbital coordinates. No records of who or what they were going to rendezvous with there. Major Piet looked out the window at the dust storm blowing there. There are 20 ground car buses in that lot, he murmured, as if speaking to himself. Each one can transport up to 80 people. A bit of logistical overkill if the Opus Dei contingent here amounted to just the 360-some people whose bodies we found. Governor Paolo frowned and crossed her arms. We don't know how many Opus Dei personnel were here, Major. As you pointed out, the records were destroyed. Perhaps there were thousands. Commander Browning stepped into the circle of VIPs.
Begging your pardon, Governor, but the barracks within the field perimeter here could house about 400 people. I think that the Major may be right. All of the Opus Dei personnel may be accounted for in the bodies we've found.
You can't be sure of that. You can't be sure of that, Commander, said Governor Paolo, her voice sounding displeased. You can't be sure of that, Commander. Better.
No, ma'am.
She gestured toward the dust storm that had all but obscured the parked buses. And we have evidence that they needed transport for many more people.
Perhaps they were an advance contingent, said Commander Browning, preparing the way for a much larger population.
Then why destroy the records and limited AIs? Said Major Piet. Why does it look like they were preparing to move out for good? The Grand Inquisitor stepped into the circle and held up one black-gloved hand. We'll end the speculation for now. The Holy Office will begin taking depositions and carrying out interrogations tomorrow. Governor, may we use your office at the palace? Of course, Your Excellency. Paolo lowered her face, either to show deference or to hide her eyes, or both. Very good, said the Grand Inquisitor. Commander, Major, call the skimmers. We'll leave the forensic teams and the morgue workers out here. Cardinal Mustafa peered out at the worsening storm. Its howl could be heard through the 10 layers of window plastic now. What's the local word for this dust storm? Simoon, said Governor Paolo. The storms used to cover the entire world. They're growing in intensity every Martian year.
The locals say that it's the old Martian gods, whispered Archbishop Robeson. "They're reclaiming their own." Less than 14 light-years out from Old Earth system, above the world called Vitus-Gray-Balianus B, a starship that had once been named Raphael, but which now held no name, finished its braking run into geosynchronous orbit. The 4 living things on board floated in zero-G, their gazes fixed on the image of the desert world on the plot board.
How reliable is our reading of the perturbations in the Farcaster field these days?
Said the female called Scylla.
More reliable than most other clues,
said her seeming twin, Radamanth Nemes.
We'll check it out.
"Shall we start with one of the Pax bases?" said the male named Gyges.
The largest,
said Nemes.
"That would be Pax base Bombasino," said Briarius, checking the code on the plot board. "Northern Hemisphere, along the Central Canal route. Population of—"
It doesn't matter what the population is,
interrupted Radamanth Nemes.
It just matters whether the child Aenea and the android and that bastard Endymion have come that way. Dropship's prepped, said Scylla.
They screeched into atmosphere, extended wings just as they crossed the Terminator, used the Vatican Diski code via transponder to clear the way for their landing, and set down amid scorpions, troopship skimmers, and armored EMVs. A flustered lieutenant greeted them and escorted them to the base commander's office.
"You say that you are members of the Noble Guard?"
said Commander Solznikov, studying their faces and the readout on the Diski interface at the same time.
We have said it,
Radamanth Nemes replied tonelessly.
Our papers, order chips, and Diski have said it. How many repetitions do you require, Commander?
Solznikov's face and neck reddened above the high collar of his tunic. He looked down at the interface holo instead of replying. Technically, these Noble Guard officers, members of one of the Pope's exotic new units, could pull rank on him. Technically, they could have him shot or excommunicated, since their ranks of cohort leaders in the Noble Guard combined the powers of both Pax Fleet and the Vatican. Technically, according to the wording and priority encryption of the Diski, they could pull rank on a planetary governor or dictate church policy to a world's presiding archbishop. Technically, Solznikov wished these pale freaks had never shown up on his backwater world. The commander forced a smile.
"Our forces here are at your disposal. What can I do for you?"
The thin, pale woman named Nemes held a holo card over the commander's desk and activated it. Suddenly, the life-size heads of 3 people floated in the space between them. Or rather, 2 people, since the third face was obviously that of a blue-skinned android.
"I didn't think that there were any androids left in the Pax," said Solznikov.
Have you had reports of any of these 3 in your territory, Commander?
Said Nemes, ignoring his question.
It is probable they would have been reported along the major river which runs from your North Pole to the equator.
"It's actually a canal,"
began Solznikov and stopped. None of the 4 looked as if they had any interest in small talk or extraneous information. He called his aide, Colonel Vinara, into the office.
"Their names?"
said Solznikov as Vinara stood poised with his comlog ready. Nemes gave 3 names that meant nothing to the commander. "Those aren't local names.
"Those aren't local names," he said as Colonel Vinara checked records. "Members of the indigenous culture. It's called the Amoiete Spectrum Helix. Tend to accumulate names the way my hunting dog back on Patalfa collected ticks. You see, they have this triune marriage arrangement where—"
They are not locals,
interrupted Nemes. Her thin lips looked as bloodless as the rest of her pale face above the red uniform collar.
They're off-worlders.
Well,
said Solznikov, relieved that he would not be dealing with these Noble Guard freaks for more than a minute or two more.
Then we can't help you. You see, Bombasino's the only working spaceport on Vitus-Gray-Balianus B now that we closed down the indigeny operation at Kerouac-Tambat, and except for a few spacers who end up in our brig, there's no immigration at all here. The locals are all Spectrum Helix, and, well, they like colors, they surely do, but an android would stand out like a... well, Colonel?
Colonel Vinara looked up from his database search.
Neither the images nor names match with anything in our records except for an all points bulletin sent through via Pax fleet about 4.5 standard years ago.
He looked questioningly at the noble guardsman. Nemes and her siblings stared back without comment. Commander Solznikov spread his hand.
I'm sorry. We've been busy for the last 2 weeks on a major training exercise I had running here. But if anyone come through here who match these descriptions...
Sir, said Colonel Vinara, there were those 4 runaway spacers.
God damn it,
thought Solznikov. To the noble guardsman, he said,
4 mercantilist spacers who jumped ship rather than face charges for use of illegal drugs. As I remember it, they were all men, all in their 60s, and...
He turned significantly to Colonel Vinara, trying to tell him to shut the fuck up with his gaze and tone.
And we found their bodies...
There we go, we're back. I have no idea how long it's been out. I have no clue. Does anyone know? Okay, give me a minute. Give me a minute here. I'm going to pop on my headphones and check. Nuts. I am incensed. I was not paying attention to the cable. Where are you? Here we go. Do. That's not it. Did I go there? Come on. Less than a minute. Well, that's reassuring. Here we go. Let me check in here. Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, very good. I know where we're at. Excellent. Sorry about that. Here we go. We will start with... Sir, said Colonel Vinara. There were those 4 runaway spacers.
God damn it,
thought Solznikov. To the noble guardsman, he said,
4 mercantilist spacers who jumped ship rather than face charges for use of illegal drugs. As I remember it, they were all men, all in their 60s, and...
He turned significantly to Colonel Vinara, trying to tell him to shut the fuck up with his gaze and tone. "And we found their bodies in the Big Greasy, didn't we, Colonel?"
"3 bodies, sir,"
said Colonel Vinara, oblivious to his commander's signals. He was checking the database again. "One of our skimmers went down near Kiroatambat, and the Med dispatched, Dr. Abner Molina to go down canal with a missionary to care for the injured crew."
"What the hell does this have to do with anything, Colonel?" snapped Solznikov. "These officers are searching for a teenager, a man in his 30s, and an android."
"Yes, sir," said Vinara, looking up, startled, from his comlog. "But Dr. Molina radioed in that she had treated a sick off-worlder in Lochchild Lamond. We assumed that it was the 4th spacer." Radamanth Nemes took a step forward so quickly that Commander Solznikov flinched involuntarily. There was something about the slim woman's movements that was not quite human.
"Where is Lochchild Lamond?" demanded Nemes.
"It's just a village along the canal about 80 clicks south of here," said Solznikov.
He turned to Colonel Vinara as if all this commotion were his aide's fault.
"When are they flying the prisoner back?"
"Tomorrow morning, sir. We have a med skimmer scheduled to pick up the crew in Kiroatambat at 600 hours, and they'll stop in—" The colonel stopped speaking as the 4 noble guard officers spun on their heels and made for the door. Nemes paused just long enough to say,
"Commander, clear our flight path between here and this Lochchild Lamond. We'll be taking the dropship."
"That's not necessary," said the commander, checking the screen on his desk. "The spacer is under arrest and will be delivered—" "Hey!"
The 4 noble guard officers had clattered down the steps outside his office and were crossing the tarmac. Solznikov rushed out onto the landing and shouted after them.
"Dropships aren't allowed to operate in atmosphere here except to land at Bombasino. Bombasino! Hey! We'll send a skimmer! Hey! The spacer's almost certainly not one of your— He's under guard! Hey!"
The 4 did not look back as they reached their ship, ordered an escalator to morph down to them, and disappeared through the dropship hull. Sirens went off across the base, and personnel ran for shelter as the heavy dropship lifted on thrusters, shifted to EM, and accelerated south across the port perimeter.
"Jesus fucking Christ," whispered Commander Solznikov.
"Pardon me, sir?" said Colonel Vinara. Solznikov gave him a glare that would have melted lead.
"Dispatch 2 combat skimmers immediately. No, make that 3. I want a squad of Marines aboard each skimmer. This is our turf, and I don't want these anemic noble guard pissants doing so much as littering without our say-so. I want the skimmers there first, and that fucking spacer taken into custody. Our custody, if it means hair-lipping every Spectrum Helix indigene between here and Lochchild Lamond. Savvy, Colonel?"
Vinara could only stare at his commander.
"Move!"
shouted Commander Solznikov. Colonel Vinara moved. It's always when I stop paying attention to my microphone that it decides to die. I am getting a replacement cable. I think that's the problem. I am hoping that's the problem, and that should resolve the issue. I don't know when that'll be in yet. It hasn't shipped last I saw. I was awake all that long night and the next day, writhing in pain, shuttling to the bathroom while carrying my IV drip apparatus, trying painfully to urinate, and then checking the absurd filter I had to urinate through for any sign of the kidney stone that was killing me. Sometime in the late morning, I passed the thing. For a minute, I couldn't believe it. The pain had been less for the last... For a minute, I couldn't believe it. The pain had been less for the past half hour or so, just the echo of pain in my back and groin, actually, but as I stared at the tiny, reddish thing in the filter cone, something larger than a grain of sand but smaller than a pebble, I couldn't believe that it could have caused such agony for so many hours.
"Believe it
Aenea said as she sat on the edge of the counter and watched me pull my pajama shirt back in place.
It's often the smallest things in life that cause us the greatest pain.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, I said. I knew, vaguely, that Aenea was not there, that I would never have urinated in front of anyone like that, much less in front of this girl. I had been hallucinating her presence ever since the first ultramorph injection.
Congratulations,
said the Aenea hallucination. Her smile seemed real enough, that slightly mischievous, slightly teasing turning up of the right side of her mouth that I'd grown accustomed to, and I could see that she was wearing the green denim slacks and white cotton shirt she often wore when working in the desert heat. But I could also see the sink basin and soft towels through her. "Thanks," I said, and shuffled back to collapse in the bed. I could not believe that the pain would not return. In fact, Dr. Molina had said that there might be several stones. Aenea was gone when Demria, Demloa, and the trooper on guard came into the room.
"Oh, it's wonderful,"
said Demria.
"We are so glad," said Demloa. "We hoped you would not have to go to the Pax Infirmary for surgery."
"Put your right hand up here," said the trooper. He handcuffed me to the brass headboard. "I'm a prisoner?" I said groggily. "You always have been," grunted the trooper. His dark skin was sweaty under his helmet visor. "The skirm will be by tomorrow morning to pick you up. Wouldn't want you missing the ride." He went back out to the shade of the barrel tree out front.
"Ah,"
said Demloa, touching my handcuffed wrist with her cool fingers.
"We are sorry, Raul Endymion."
"It's not your fault," I said, feeling so tired and drugged that my tongue did not want to work right. "You've been nothing but kind. So kind." The fading pain kept me from sleeping.
"Father Clifton would like to come in and speak with you. Would that be all right?"
At that moment I would have welcomed spider rats nibbling on my toes about as much as the idea of chatting with a missionary priest. I said, "Sure, why not?" Father Clifton was younger than I, short, but not as short as Demria or Demloa or her race, and pudgy, with thinning, sandy hair receding from his friendly, flushed face. I thought that I knew his type. There had been a chaplain in the Home Guard, a bit like Father Clifton, earnest, mostly inoffensive, a bit of a mama's boy who may have gone into the priesthood so that he would never have to grow up and become really responsible for himself. It was Grandam who had pointed out to me how the parish priests in the various moor-end villages on Hyperion tended to remain somewhat childlike, treated with deference by their parishioners, fussed over by housekeepers and women of all ages, never in real competition with other adult males. I don't think that Grandam was actively anti-clerical, in spite of her refusal to accept the cross, just amused by this tendency of parish priests in the great and powerful Pax Empire. Father Clifton wanted to discuss theology. I think that I moaned then, but it must have been taken for a reaction to the kidney stone, for the good priest merely leaned closer, patted my arm, and murmured,
There, there, my son."
Did I mention that he was at least 5 or 6 years younger than me?
"Raul, may I call you Raul?"
"Sure, Father." I closed my eyes as if falling asleep.
"What is your opinion of the church, Raul?"
Under my eyelids I rolled my eyes. "The church, Father?" Father Clifton waited. I shrugged. Or, to be more precise, I tried to shrug. It's not that easy when one wrist is handcuffed above your head and the other arm is on the receiving end of an intravenous drip. Father Clifton must have understood my awkward motion.
"You're indifferent to it, then?"
he asked softly. As indifferent as one can be to an organization that's tried to capture or kill me, I thought. "Not indifferent, Father," I said. "It's just that the church, well, it hasn't been relevant to my life in most ways." One of the missionary's sandy eyebrows rose slightly.
Gosh, Raul, the church is a lot of things. Not all of them spotlessly good, I'm sure, but I hardly think that it could be accused of being irrelevant.
I considered shrugging again, but decided one awkward spasm of that sort was enough. I see what you mean, I said, hoping that the conversation was over. Father Clifton leaned even closer, his elbows on his knees, his hands set together in front of him, but more in the aspect of persuasion and reason than prayer.
Raul, you know they're taking you back to Base Bombasino in the morning.
I nodded. My head was still free to move.
You know that the Pax fleet in Mercantilus, punishment for desertion is death.
Yeah, I said, but only after a fair trial. Father Clifton ignored my sarcasm. His brow was wrinkled with what could only be worry, although for my fate or my eternal soul, I was not sure which. Perhaps for both.
For Christians, he began, and paused a moment. For Christians, such an execution is punishment, some discomfort, perhaps even momentary terror, but then they mend their ways and go on with their lives. For you...
Nothingness, I said, helping him end his sentence. The big gulp, eternal darkness, nada-ness. I become a worm's casserole. Father Clifton was not amused.
This does not have to be the case, my son.
I sighed and looked out the window. It was early afternoon on Vitus-Gray-Balianus B. The sunlight was different here than on worlds that I had known well, Hyperion, Old Earth, even Mare Infinitus, and other places I had visited briefly but intensely. But the difference was so subtle that I would have found it hard to describe. But it was beautiful. There was no arguing that. I looked at the cobalt sky, streaked with violet clouds, at the butter-rich light falling on pink adobe and the wooden sill. I listened to the sound of children playing in the alley, to the soft conversation of Cézambre and her sick brother, Bin, to the sudden, soft laughter as something in the game they were playing amused them, and I thought, to lose all this forever? And I hallucinated Aenea's voice, saying, "To lose all this forever is the essence of being human, my love." Father Clifton cleared his throat.
Have you ever heard of Pascal's wager, Raul?
Yes.
You have?
Father Clifton sounded surprised. I had the feeling that I had thrown him off his stride in his prepared line of argument.
Then you know why it makes sense,
he said rather lamely. I sighed again. The pain was steady now, not coming and going in the tidal surges that had overwhelmed me the past few days. I remembered first encountering Blaise Pascal in conversations with Grandam when I was a kid, then discussing him with Aenea in the Arizona twilight, and finally looking up his Pensées in the excellent library at Taliesin West.
Pascal was a mathematician, Father Clifton was saying, pre-Hegira, mid-18th century, I think.
Actually, he lived in the mid-1600s, I said. 1623 to 1662, I think. Actually, I was bluffing a bit on the dates. The numbers seemed right, but I would not have bet my life on them. I remembered the era because Aenea and I had spent a couple of weeks one winter discussing the Enlightenment and its effect on people and institutions pre-Hegira, pre-Pax.
Yes, said Father Clifton, but the time he lived isn't as important as his so-called wager. Consider it, Raul. On one side, the chance of resurrection, immortality, and eternity in heaven and benefiting from Christ's light. On the other side, how did you put it?
The big gulp, I said. Nada-ness.
Worse than that,
said the young priest, his voice thick with earnest conviction.
Nada means nothingness, sleep without dreams. But Pascal realized that the absence of Christ's redemption is worse than that. It's eternal regret, longing, infinite sadness.
And hell, I said, eternal punishment. Father Clifton squeezed his hands together, obviously uncomfortable at that side of the equation.
Perhaps, he said. But even if hell were just eternal recognition of the chances one has lost, why risk that? Pascal realized that if the Church was wrong, nothing would be lost by embracing its hope. And if it was right... I smiled. A bit cynical, isn't it, Father? The priest's pale eyes looked directly into mine. Not as cynical as going to your death for no reason, Raul. Not when you can accept Christ as your Lord, do good works among other human beings, serve your community and your brothers and sisters in Christ, and save your physical life and your immortal soul in the process. I nodded. After a minute, I said, maybe the time he lived was important. Father Clifton blinked, not following me. Blaise Pascal, I mean, I said. He lived through an intellectual revolution the likes of which humanity has rarely seen. On top of that, Copernicus and Kepler and their ilk were opening up the universe 1,000-fold. The sun was becoming, well, just a sun, Father. Everything was being displaced, moved aside, shoved from the center. Pascal once said, I am terrified by the eternal silence of these infinite spaces. Father Clifton leaned closer. I could smell the soap and shaving cream scent on his smooth skin. All the more reason to consider the wisdom of his wager, Raul. I blinked, wanting to move away from the pink and freshly scrubbed moon of his face. I was afraid that I smelled of sweat and pain and fear. I had not brushed my teeth in 24 hours. I don't think that I want to make any wager if it means dealing with a church that has grown so corrupt that it makes obedience and submission the price of its saving the life of someone's child, I said. Father Clifton pulled away as if slapped. His fair skin flushed a deeper red. Then he stood and patted my arm. You get some sleep. We'll speak again before you leave tomorrow. But I did not have until tomorrow. If I had been outside at that moment, looking at just the precise quadrant of the late afternoon sky, I would have seen the scratch of flame across the dome of cobalt as Nemesis' dropship entered the landing pattern for Pax Base Bombasino. When Father Clifton left, I fell asleep. I watched as Aenea and I sat in the vestibule of her shelter in the desert night and continued our conversation. I've had this dream before, I said, looking around and touching the stone beneath the canvas of her shelter. The rock still held some of the day's heat. Yes, said Aenea. She was sipping from a fresh cup of tea. You were going to tell me the secret that makes you the Messiah, I heard myself say. The secret which makes you the bond between two worlds that the AI Uman spoke of. Yes, said my young friend, and nodded again. But first, tell me if you think that your reply to Father Clifton was adequate. Adequate? I shrugged. I was angry. Aenea sipped tea. Steam rose from the cup and touched her lashes. But you didn't really respond to his question about Pascal's wager. That was all the response I needed to give, I said, somewhat irritated. Little Binria Demloa Alem is dying of cancer. The church uses their cruciform as leverage. That's corrupt. Foul. I'll have none of it. Aenea looked at me over the steaming cup. But if the church were not corrupt, Raul. But if the church were not corrupt, Raul, if it offered the cruciform without price or reservation, would you accept it? No. The immediacy of my answer surprised me. The girl smiled. So it is not the corruption of the church that is at the heart of your objection. You reject resurrection itself. I started to speak, hesitated, frowned, and then rephrased what I was thinking. This kind of resurrection I reject. Yes. Still smiling, Aenea said, Is there another kind? The church used to think so, I said. For almost 3,000 years, the resurrection it offered was of the soul, not the body. And do you believe in that other kind of resurrection? No, I said again, as quickly as I had before. I shook my head.
Pascal's wager never appealed to me. It seems logically shallow.
Perhaps because it posits only two choices, said Aenea.
Somewhere in the desert night, an owl made a short, sharp sound.
Spiritual resurrection and immortality, or death and damnation, she said.
Those last two aren't the same thing, I said.
No, but perhaps to someone like Blaise Pascal they were. Someone terrified of the eternal silence of these infinite spaces.
A spiritual agoraphobic, I said. Aenea laughed. The sound was so sincere and spontaneous that I could not help loving it. Her.
Religion seems to have always offered us that false duality, she said, setting her cup of tea on a flat stone. The silences of infinite space, or the cozy comfort of inner certainty.
I made a rude noise. The Pax Church offers a more pragmatic certainty.
Aenea nodded. That may be its only recourse these days. Perhaps our reservoir of spiritual faith has run out.
Perhaps it should have run out a long time ago, I said sternly. Superstition has taken a terrible toll on our species. Wars, pogroms, resistance to logic and science and medicine, not to mention gathering power in the hands of people like those who run the Pax.
Is all religion superstition then, Raul? All faith then folly?
I squinted at her. The dim light from inside the shelter and the dimmer starlight outside played on her sharp cheekbones and the gentle curve of her chin. "What do you mean?" I said, correctly expecting a trap.
If you had faith in me, would that be folly?
"Faith in you... how?" I said, hearing my voice sounding suspicious, almost sullen. "As a friend or as a messiah?"
"What's the difference?"
asked Aenea, smiling again in that way that usually meant a challenge was in the offing. "Faith in a friend is... friendship," I said. "Loyalty." I hesitated. "Love."
"And faith in a messiah?" said Aenea, her eyes catching the light.
I made a brusque throwing away gesture. "That's religion."
"But what if your friend is the messiah?" she said, smiling openly now.
"You mean, what if your friend thinks she's the messiah?" I said. I shrugged again. "I guess you stay loyal to her and try to keep her out of the asylum." Aenea's smile faded, but I sensed that it was not because of my harsh comment. Her gaze had turned inward.
"I wish it were that simple, my dear friend."
Touched, filled with a wave of anxiety as real as surging nausea, I said, "You were going to tell me why you were chosen as this messiah, kiddo. What makes you the bond between two worlds?" The girl, young woman, I realized, nodded solemnly.
"I was chosen simply because I was that first child of the core and humankind."
She had said that earlier. I nodded this time. "So those are the two worlds which you connect, the core and us?"
"Two of the worlds, yes,"
said Aenea, looking up at me again.
"Not the only two. That's precisely what messiahs do, Raul. Bridge different worlds, different eras, provide the bond between two irreconcilable concepts."
"And your connection to both these worlds makes you the messiah?" I said again. Aenea shook her head quickly, almost impatiently. Something like anger glinted in her eyes.
"No," she said sharply. "I'm the messiah because of what I can do."
I blinked at her vehemence. "What can you do, kiddo?" Aenea held out her hand and gently touched me with it.
"Remember when I said that the Church and Pax were right about me, Raul? That I was a virus?"
"Uh-huh." She squeezed my wrist.
"I can pass that virus, Raul. I can infect others. Geometric progression. A plague of carriers."
"Carriers of what?" I said. "Messiahhood?" She shook her head. Her expression was so sad that it made me want to console her, put my arms around her. Her grip remained firm on my wrist.
"No," she said. just the next step in what we are, what we can be.
I took a breath. You talked about teaching the physics of love, I said, of understanding love as a basic force of the universe. Is that the virus? Still holding my wrist, she looked at me a long moment.
That's the source of the virus, she said softly. What I teach is to how to use that energy.
How? I wondered. I whispered. Aenea blinked slowly, as if she were the one dreaming and about to awaken.
Let's say there are 4 steps, she said. 4 stages, 4 levels.
I waited. Her fingers made a loop around my captured wrist.
The first is learning the language of the dead, she said.
What is that?
Shh.
Aenea had raised the first finger of her free hand to her lips to shush me.
The second is learning the language of the living, she said.
I nodded, not understanding either phrase.
The third is hearing the music of the spheres, she whispered.
In my reading at Taliesin West, I had run across this ancient phrase. It was all mixed up with astrology, the pre-scientific age on old Earth, Kepler's little wooden models of a solar system predicated on perfect shapes, shells of stars and planets being moved by angels, volumes of double talk. I had no idea what my friend was talking about and how it could apply to an age when humanity moved faster than light through the spiral arm of the galaxy.
The 4th step, she said, her gaze turned inward again, is learning to take the first step.
The first step, I repeated, confused. You mean the first step you mentioned, what was it? Learning the language of the dead? Aenea shook her head, slowly bringing me into focus. It was as if she had been elsewhere for a moment.
No, she said, I mean taking the first step.
Almost holding my breath, I said, All right, I'm ready, kiddo. Teach me.
Aenea smiled again. That's the irony, Raul, my love. If I choose to do this, I'll always be known as the one who teaches. But the silly thing is, I don't have to teach it. I only have to share this virus to impart each of these stages to those who wish to learn.
I looked down at where her slim fingers encircled a part of my wrist. So you've already given me this virus? I said. I felt nothing except the usual electric tingle that her touch always created in me. My friend laughed.
No, Raul, you're not ready. And it takes communion to share the virus, not just contact. And I haven't decided what to do, if I should do this.
To share with me? I said, thinking, communion?
To share with everyone, she whispered, serious again, with everyone ready to learn.
She looked directly at me again. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote was yipping.
These levels, stages, can't coexist with a cruciform, Raul.
So the born-again can't learn? I said. This would rule out the vast majority of human beings. She shook her head.
They can learn. They just can't stay born again. The cruciform has to go.
I let out my breath. I did not understand most of this, but that's because it seemed to be double talk. Don't all would-be messiahs speak double talk? Asked the cynical part of me in Grandham's level voice. Aloud, I said, there's no way to remove a cruciform without killing the person wearing it. The true death. I had always wondered if this fact had been the main reason I had been unwilling to go under the cross. Or perhaps it was just my youthful belief in my own immortality. Aenea did not respond directly. She said,
You like the Amoiete Spectrum Helix people, don't you?
Blinking, I tried to understand this. Had I dreamed that phrase, those people, that pain? Wasn't I dreaming now? Or was this a memory of a real conversation? But Aenea knew nothing of Demria, Demloa, and the others. The night and stone and canvas shelter seemed to ripple like a shredding dreamscape. "I like them," I said, feeling my friend remove her fingers from my wrist. Wasn't my wrist shackled to the headboard? Aenea nodded and sipped her cooling tea.
"There's hope for the Spectrum Helix people, and for all the thousands of other cultures which have reverted or sprung up since the fall. The hegemony meant homogeneity, Raul. The Pax means even more. The human genome, the human soul, distrusts homogeneity, Raul. They, are always ready to take a chance, to risk change and diversity."
"Aenea," I said, reaching for her, we can't." There was a terrible sense of falling, and the dreamscape came apart like thin cardboard in hard rain. I could not see my friend.
Wake up, Raul. They are coming for you. The Pax is coming.
I tried to awaken, groping toward consciousness like a sluggish machine crawling uphill, but the weight of fatigue and the painkillers kept dragging me down. I did not understand why Aenea wanted me awake. We were conversing so well in the dream.
Wake up, Raul Endymion.
Wake up, Raul Endymion. Endymion. They have the phonetic pronunciation.
Wake up. Wake up, Raul Endymion.
It was not Aenea. Even before I was fully awake and focused, I recognized the soft voice and thick dialect of Dem Ria. I sat straight up. The woman was undressing me. I realized that she had pulled the loose nightshirt off and was tugging my undershirt on, cleaned and smelling of fresh breezes now, but unmistakably my undershirt. My undershorts were already on. My twill pants, overshirt, and vest were laid across the bottom of the bed. How had she done this with the handcuff on I stared at my wrist. The handcuffs were lying open on the bedclothes. My arm tingled painfully as circulation returned. I licked my lips and tried to speak without slurring. "The Pax? Coming?" Dem Ria pulled my shirt on as if I were her child, Bin, or younger. I motioned her hands away and tried to close the buttons with suddenly awkward fingers. They had used buttons rather than seal tabs at Taliesin West on Old Earth. I thought I had grown used to them, but this was taking forever.
"And we heard on the radio that a dropship had landed at Bombasino. There are 4 people in unknown uniforms, 2 men, 2 women. They were asking the commandant about you. They'll just lift it off, the dropship and 3 skimmers. They will be here in 4 minutes, perhaps less."
"Radio?" I said stupidly. "I thought you said that the radio didn't work. Isn't that why the priest went to the base to get the doctor?"
"For the Clifton's radio was not working,"
whispered Dem Ria, pulling me to my feet. She held me steady as I stepped into my trousers.
"We have radios, tight beam transmitters, satellite relays, all of which the Pax knows nothing about. And spies in place. One has warned us. Hurry, Raul Endymion. The ships will be here in a minute."
I came fully awake then, literally flushed with a surge of anger and hopelessness that threatened to wash me away. Why won't these bastards leave me alone? 4 people in unknown uniforms. Pax, obviously. Evidently, their search for Aenea, Abetic, and me had not ended when the priest captain, De Soya, had let us escape the trap on God's Grove more than 4 years earlier. I looked at the chronometer readout on my comlog. The ships would be landing in a minute or so. There was nowhere I could run in that time where Pax troopers would not find me. "Let me go," I said, pulling away from the short woman in the blue robe. The window was open, the afternoon breeze coming through the curtains. I imagined that I could hear the near-ultrasonic hum of skimmers. "I have to get away from your house." I had images of the Pax touching the home with young Césambre and Bin still in it. Dem Ria pulled me back from the window. At that moment, the man of the household, young Alum Mikhail Dem Alum, came in with Dem Loa. They were carrying the Lucian bulk of the Pax trooper who had been left to guard me. Cessambre, her dark eyes bright, was lifting the guard's feet, while Bin struggled to pull one of the man's huge boots off. The Lucian was fast asleep, mouth open, drool moistening the high collar of his combat fatigues. I looked at Demria.
Demloa brought him some tea about 15 minutes ago,
she said softly. She made a graceful gesture that caused the blue sleeve of her robe to billow.
I am afraid we used the rest of your ultramorph prescription, Raul Endymion.
I have to go, I began. The ache in my back was bearable, but my legs were shaky.
No, said Demria. They will catch you within minutes.
She pointed to the window. From outside there came the unmistakable subsonic rumble of a dropship on EM drive, followed by the thud and bark of its thrusters. The thing must be hovering right above the village, seeking a landing site. A second later, the window vibrated to a triple sonic boom, and 2 black skimmers banked above the adobe buildings next door. Alum Mikhail had stripped the Lucian to his thermal weave underwear and had laid him out on the bed. Now he snapped the man's massive right wrist into the handcuffs and snicked the other cuff around the headboard bar. Demloa and Cessambre were sweeping up the layers of fatigue clothing, body armor, and huge boots, and stuffing them in a laundry bag. Little Bin Ria Demloa Alem tossed the guard's helmet in the bag. The thin boy was carrying the heavy flechette pistol. I stared at the sight. Children and weapons was a mix I learned to avoid even when I was a child myself, learning to handle power weapons while our caravan rumbled its way across the Hyperion moors. But Alem smiled and took the pistol from the boy, patting him on the back. It was obvious from the way Bin had held the weapon, fingers away from the trigger guard, pointing the muzzle away from himself and his father, checking the safety indicator even as he gave the pistol up, that he had handled such a device before. Bin smiled at me, took the heavy bag with the guard's clothing in it, and ran out of the room. The noise outside rose in a crescendo, and I turned to look out the window. A black skimmer kicked up dust less than 30 meters down the street that ran along the canal. I could see it through a gap between the houses. The larger dropship lowered itself out of sight to the south, probably landing in the grassy open area near the well where I had collapsed in pain from the kidney stone. I had just finished wiggling into my boots and securing my vest when Alem handed me the flechette pistol. I checked the safety and propellant charge indicators out of habit, but then shook my head. No, I said, it would be suicide to attack Pax troopers with just this. Their armor. I was not actually thinking about their armor at that moment, but rather about the return fire from assault weapons that would level this house in an instant. I thought of the boy outside with the laundry bag of troopers' armor. Bin, I said, if they catch him... We know, said Demria, pulling me away from the bed and into the narrow hallway. I did not remember this part of the house. My universe for the past 40-some hours had been the bedroom and adjoining lavatory. Come, she said. I pulled away again, handing the pistol to Alem. Just let me run, I said, my heart pounding. I gestured toward the snoring Lucian. They won't think that's me for a second. They can tight-beam the doctor, if she's not already in one of those skimmers, to ID me. Just tell them... I looked at the friendly faces in their blue robes. Tell them I overpowered the guard and held you at gunpoint. I stopped then, realizing that the guard would destroy that cover story as soon as he awoke. The family's complicity in my escape would be self-evident. I looked at the flechette pistol again, half ready to reach for it. One burst of steel needles and the sleeping trooper would never awaken to destroy the cover-up, and endanger these good people. Only I could never do it. I might shoot a Pax trooper in a fair fight. Indeed, the adrenaline rush of anger that was burning through my weakness and terror told me that it would be a welcome relief to have that opportunity, but I could never shoot this sleeping man. But there would be no fair fight. Pax troopers in combat armor, much less these mysterious 4 in the dropship, Swiss Guard, would be immune to flechettes and anything else short of Pax assault weapons. and the Swiss Guard would be immune to those. I was screwed. These good people who had shown me such kindness were screwed. A rear door slammed open, and Bin slid into the hallway, his robe hiked up to show spindly legs covered with dust. I stared at him, thinking that the boy would not get his cruciform and would die of cancer. The adults might well spend the next standard decade in a Pax prison. "I'm sorry," I said, hunting for words. I could hear the commotion in the streets as troopers hurried through the evening rush of pedestrians.
Raul Endymion,
said Dem Loa in her soft voice, handing me the rucksack they had brought from my kayak.
please shut up and follow us at once.
There was a tunnel entrance beneath the floor of the hallway. I had always thought that hidden passages were the stuff of holodramas, but I followed Dem Ria into this one willingly enough. We were a strange procession, Dem Ria and Dem Loa sweeping down the steep staircase ahead of me, then me carrying the flechette pistol and fumbling the rucksack on my back, then little Bin followed by his sister, Cessambre, then, carefully locking the trapdoor behind him, Alem Mikhail Dem Alem. No one stayed behind. The house was empty except for the snoring Lucian trooper. The stairway went deeper than a normal basement level, and at first I thought that the walls were adobe like the ones above. Then I realized that the passage was cut from a soft stone, perhaps sandstone. 27 steps and we reached the bottom of the vertical shaft, and Dem Ria led the way down a narrow passage, illuminated by pale chemical glow globes. I wondered why this average working-class home would have an underground passage. As if reading my mind, Dem Loa's blue cowl turned, and she whispered,
"The Amoiete Spectrum Helix demands, discreet entrances to one another's homes, especially during the twice darkness."
"Twice darkness?" I whispered back, ducking under one of the globes. We had already gone 20 or 25 meters, away from the canal river, I thought, and the passage still curved out of sight to the right.
"The slow dual eclipse of the sun by this world's two moons," whispered Dem Loa. "It lasts precisely 19 minutes. It is the primary reason that we chose this world. Please excuse the pun."
"Ah," I said. I did not understand, but it did not seem to matter at that moment. Pax troops have sensors to find spider holes. "Pax troops have sensors to find spider holes like this," I whispered to the women in front of me. "They have deep radar to search through rock. They have—" "Yes, yes," said Alem from behind me, "but they will be held up a few minutes by the mayor and the others." "The mayor?" I repeated rather stupidly. My legs were still weak from the 2 days in bed and pain. My back and groin ached, but it was a minor pain, inconsequential, compared to what I had passed through, and what had passed through me, during the last couple of days. The mayor is challenging the Pax's right to search," whispered Dem Ria. The passage widened and went straight for at least 100 meters. We passed 2 branching tunnels. This wasn't a bolt hole. It was a bloody catacomb. "The Pax recognizes the mayor's authority in Loch Child Lamont," she whispered. The silken robes of the 5 family members in blue were also whispering against the sandstone as we hurried down the passage. "We still have law and courts on Vitus-Gray-Balianus B, so they are not allowed unlimited search and seizure rights." "But they'll download permission from whatever authority they need," I said, hurrying to keep up with the women. We came to another juncture, and they turned right.
"Eventually," said Dem Loa, "but the streets are now filled with all of the colors of the Loch Child Lamont strand of the helix. Reds, whites, greens, ebonies, yellows, thousands of people from our village. And many more are coming from nearby lochs. No one will volunteer which house is the one where you were kept. Father Clifton has been lured out of town on a ruse, so he can be of no help to the Pax troopers. Dr. Molina has been detained in Koroa Tambat by some of our people, and is currently out of touch with her Pax superiors. And your guard will be sleeping for at least another hour. This way.
We turned left into a wider passage, stopped at the front door we had seen, waited for Demria to palm-lock it open, and then stepped into a large echoing space carved into the stone. We were standing on a metal stairway looking down on what appeared to be a subterranean garage. Half a dozen long, slim vehicles with oversized wheels, stern wings, sails, and pedals clustered by primary colors. These things were like buckboards set on spidery suspensions, obviously powered by wind and muscle power, and covered over with wood, bright, silky polymer. These things were like buckboards set on spidery suspensions, obviously powered by wind and muscle power, and covered over with wood, bright, silky polymer fabrics, and perspex.
"Wind cycles,"
said Cessambre. Several men and women in emerald green robes and high boots were preparing 3 of the wagons for departure. Lashed in the back of one of the long wagon beds was my kayak. Everyone was moving down the clattering staircase, but I stopped at the head of the stairs. My balking was so sudden that poor Bin and Cessambre almost crashed into me. "What is it?" said Alem Mikhail. I had tucked the flechette pistol in my belt, and now I opened my hands. "Why are you doing this? Why is everyone helping? What's going on?" Demria took a step back up the metal staircase and leaned on the railing. Her eyes were as bright as her daughter's had been.
"If they take you, Raul Endymion, they will kill you."
"How do you know?" I said. My voice was soft, but the acoustics of the underground garage were such that the men and women in green looked up from where they were working below.
"You spoke in your sleep,"
said Demloa. I cocked my head, not understanding. I had been dreaming of Aenea and our conversation. What would that have told these people? Demria took another step upward. Demria took another step upward and touched my wrist with her cool hand.
"The Amoiete Spectrum Helix has foretold this woman, Raul Endymion, this one named Aenea. We call her the one who teaches."
I felt goosebumps at that moment, in the chill glow-globe light of this buried place. The old poet, Uncle Martin, had spoken of my young friend as a messiah, but his cynicism leaked into everything he said or did. The people of Taliesin West had respected Aenea, but to believe that the energetic 16-year-old was actually a world historical figure, it seemed unlikely. And the girl and I had spoken of it in real life and in my ultramorph dreams, but, my God, I was on a world scores of light years away from Hyperion and an eternal distance away from the Lesser Magellanic Cloud where old Earth was hidden. How had these people...
"Alpul Amoiete knew of the one who teaches when he composed the Helix Symphony," said Demloa. "All of the people of the spectrum were descended from empath stock. The Helix was and is a way to refine that empathic ability."
I shook my head. "I'm sorry, I don't understand."
"Please understand this, Raul Endymion," said Demria. "Please understand this, Raul Endymion," said Demria, her fingers squeezing my wrist almost painfully. "If you do not escape this place, the Pax will have your body and soul. The Pax will have your soul and body, and the one who teaches needs both these things."
I squinted at the woman, thinking that she was jesting, but her pleasant, unlined face was set and serious.
"Please,"
said Little Bin, setting his little hand in my free one and pulling.
"Please hurry, Raul."
I hurried down the stairs. One of the men in green handed me a red robe. Alem Mikhail helped me fold and wrap it over my own clothes. He wrapped the red burnous and cowl in a dozen quick strokes. I would never have been able to arrange it properly. I realized with a shock that the entire family, the 2 older women, teenaged Cessambre and Little Bin, had stripped naked from their blue robes and were arranging red ones around them. I saw then that I had been wrong, thinking that they were like Lucian's. for although their bodies were shorter than Pax space average and heavily muscled, they were perfectly proportioned. None of the adults had any hair, either on their heads or elsewhere. Somehow this made their compact, perfectly toned bodies more attractive. I looked away, realizing that I was blushing. Cessambre laughed and jostled my arm. We were all in red robes now, Alan Mikhail being the last to pull his on. One glance at his heavily muscled upper torso told me that I would not last 15 seconds in a fight with the shorter man. But then, I realized, I probably would not last more than 30 seconds with Demloa or Demria either. I offered the flechette pistol to Alem, but he gestured for me to keep it, and showed me how to tuck it in one of the multiple sashes of the long crimson robe. I thought of my lack of weapons in the little backpack, a Navajo hunting knife and the little flashlight laser, and nodded my gratitude. The women and children and I were hurried into the back of the wind cycle wagon that held my kayak, and red fabric was pulled tight over the stays above us. We had to crouch low as a second layer of fabric, some wooden planks, and various crates and barrels were set in around and above us. I could just make out a glimpse of light between the tailgate and the wagon cover. I listened to footsteps on stone as Alem went up front and crawled into one of the 2 pedaling saddles. I listened as one of the other men, also now in a red robe, joined him on the cycling seat on the other side of the central yoke. With the mast still lowered above us, fabric sails reefed, we began rolling up a long ramp out of the garage. "Where are we going?" I whispered to Demria, who was lying almost next to me. The wood smelled like cedar. "The downstream forecaster arch," she whispered back. I blinked. "You know about that?" "They gave you truth tell," whispered Demloa from the other side of a crate, "and you did speak in your sleep." Bin was lying right next to me in the darkness. "We know the one who teaches has sent you on a mission," he said almost happily. "We know you have to get to the next arch." He patted the kayak that curved next to us. "I wish I could go with you." "This is too dangerous," I hissed, feeling the wagon roll out of the tunnel and into open air. Low sunlight illuminated the fabric above us. The wind cycle wagon stopped for a second as the 2 men cranked the mast erect and unfurled the sail. "Too dangerous." I meant they're taking me to the Farcaster, of course, not the mission that Aenea had sent me on. If they know who I am, I whispered to Demria, "they'll be watching the arch." I could see the silhouette of her cowl as she nodded. "They will be watching Raul Endymion, and it is dangerous. But darkness is almost here, in 14 minutes. I glanced at my comlog. It would be another 90 minutes or more until twilight, according to what I had observed the previous 2 days, and then almost another full hour until true nightfall. "It is only 6 kilometers to the downstream arch," whispered Cessambre from her place on the other side of the kayak. "The villages will be filled with the spectrum celebrating." I understood then. "The twice darkness?" I whispered. "Yes," said Demria. She patted my hand. "We must be silent now. We will be moving into traffic along the saltway." "Too dangerous," I whispered one last time as the wagon began creaking and groaning its way into traffic. I could hear the chain drive rumbling beneath the buckboard floor and feel the wind catch the sail. "Too dangerous," I said only to myself. If I had known what was happening a few hundred meters away, I would have realized how truly dangerous this moment was. I peered out through the gap between wagon wood and fabric as we rumbled along the saltway. This vehicle thoroughfare appeared to be a strip of rock-hard salt between the villages clustered along the raised canal and the reticulated desert stretching as far north as I could see. "West Wahhabi," whispered Demria as we picked up speed and headed south along the saltway. Other wind cycle wagons roared past, heading south, their sails fully engaged, their 2 peddlers working madly. Even more brightly canvassed wagons tacked north, their sails set differently, their peddlers leaning far out for balance as the creaking wagons teetered on 2 wheels, the other 2 spinning uselessly in the air. We covered the 6 kilometers in 10 minutes and turned off the Saltway onto a paved ramp that led through a cluster of homes, white stone this time, not adobe, and then Alem and the other man furled the sail and pedaled the wind cycle slowly along the cobblestone street that ran between the homes and the canal river. High, wispy ferns grew along the canal banks there between elaborately fashioned piers, gazebos, and multi-tiered docks to which were tied ornate houseboats. The city seemed to end here, where the canal widened into a waterway much more river-like than artificial, and I raised my head enough to see the huge Farcaster arch a few hundred meters downstream. Through and beyond the rusted arch, I could see only fern forest on the riverbanks and desert waste to the east and west. Alem guided the wind cycle onto a brick loading ramp and pulled under the cover of a copse of tall ferns. I glanced at my comlog. Less than 2 minutes until the twice darkness. At that instant there was a rush of warm air, and a shadow passed over us. We all crouched lower as the black Pax skimmer flew out over the river at an altitude of less than 100 meters, the aerodynamic figure-8 shape of the thing clearly visible as it banked more steeply and then swooped low above the ships headed north and south through the arch. River traffic was brisk here where the river widened, sleek racing sculls with rowing teams of 4 to 12, gleaming powerboats throwing up glistening wakes, sailboats ranging from single-person jittabouts to wallowing, square-sailed junks, canoes and rowboats, some stately houseboats churning against the current, a handful of silent electric hovercraft moving within their halos of spray, and even some rafts that reminded me of my earlier voyage with Aenea and Aebetic. The skimmer flew low over these ships, passed over the Farcaster arch headed south, flew back under it, headed north, and disappeared in the direction of Loch Child Lamond. "Come," said Alem Michael, folding back the fabric tarp above us and pulling at the kayak. "We must hurry." Suddenly there was a rush of warm air, followed by a cooler breeze that kicked dust off the riverbank. The fernheads rustled and shook above us, and the sky grew purple and then black. Stars came out. I glanced upward just long enough to see a beaded corona around one of the moons and the burning disk of the second, lower satellite as it moved into place behind the first. From north along the river, back in the direction of the linear city that included Loch Child Lamond, there came the most haunting and mournful sound I had ever heard. A long wailing, more human-throated than siren-caused, followed by a sustained note that grew deeper and deeper until it fell into the subsonic. I realized that I had heard hundreds, perhaps thousands, of horns played at the same instant as thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of human voices had joined in chorus. The darkness around us grew deeper. The stars blazed. The disk of the lower moon was like some great backlit dome that threatened to drop the darkened world at any moment. The disk of the lower moon was like some great backlit dome that threatened to drop on the darkened world at any moment. Suddenly, the many ships on the river to the south and the canal river to the north began wailing with their own sirens and horns. A cacophonous howl, this, nothing like the descending harmony of the opening chorus, and then began firing off flares and fireworks, multicolored star shells, roaring St. Catherine's wheels, red parachute flares, braided strands of yellow, blue, green, red, and white fire, the Spectrum Helix, and countless aerial bombs. The noise and light were all but overwhelming. "Hure!" repeated Alem, pulling the kayak from the wagon bed. I jumped out to help him and pulled off my concealing robe, tossing it into the back of the wagon. The next minute was a flurry of coordinated motion as Demria, Demloa, Sesambra, Bin, and I helped Alem and the unnamed man carry the kayak down to the river's edge and set it afloat. I went into the warm water up to my knees, stowed my backpack and the flechette pistol inside the little cockpit, held the kayak steady against the current, and looked at the 2 women, 2 young people, and 2 men in their billowing robes. "What is to happen to you?" I asked. My back ached from the aftermath of the kidney stone, but at the moment the tightening of my throat was the more painful distraction. Demria shook her head. "Nothing bad will happen to us, Raul Endymion. If the Pax authorities attempt to make trouble, we will simply disappear into tunnels. We will simply disappear into the tunnels beneath Waste Wahhabi until it is time to rejoin the spectrum elsewhere." She smiled and adjusted her robe on her shoulder. "But make us one promise, Raul Endymion." "Anything," I said. "If I can do it, I will." "If it is possible, ask the one who teaches to return with you to Vitus-Gray-Balianus B and the people of the Amoiete Spectrum Helix. We shall try not to convert to the Pax's Christianity until she comes to speak to us." I nodded, looking at Bin Ria Dem Loa Alem's shaven skull, his red cowl flapping around him in the breeze, his cheeks gaunt with chemotherapy, his eyes gleaming more with excitement than reflected fireworks. "Yes," I said. "If it is at all possible, I will do that." They all touched me then, not to shake hands, but merely to touch, fingers against my vest, or arm, or face, or back. I touched them back, turned the bow of the kayak into the current, and stepped into the cockpit. The paddle was in the hull clamp where I had left it. I tightened the cockpit skirt around me, as if there were white water ahead, bumped my hand against the clear plastic cover over the red panic button that Aenea had shown me as I set the pistol on the cockpit skirt. If this interlude had not caused me to panic, I was not sure what could. Held the paddle in my left hand, and waved farewell with my right. The 6 robed figures blended into the shadows beneath the ferns as the kayak swept out into the middle current. The Farcaster arch grew larger. Overhead, the first moon began to move beyond the disk of the sun, but the second, larger moon moved to cover both with its bulk. The fireworks and siren sounds continued, even grew in ferocity. I paddled closer to the right bank as I came close to the Farcaster, trying to stay in the small boat traffic headed downstream, but not too close to anyone. If they are going to intercept me, I thought, they will do it here. Without thinking, I raised the flechette pistol onto the curve of the hull in front of me. The swift current had me now, and I set the paddle in its bracket and waited to pass under the Farcaster. No other ships or small boats would be under the Farcaster when it activated. Above me, the arch was a curve of blackness against the starry sky. Suddenly, there was violent commotion on the riverbank not 20 meters to my right. I raised the pistol and stared, not understanding what I was seeing and hearing. 2 explosions like sonic booms. Strobe flashes of white light. More fireworks? No, these flashes were much brighter. Energy weapons fire? Too bright. Too unfocused. It was more like small plasma explosives going off. Then I saw something in a blink of an eye, more a retinal echo than a true vision. 2 figures locked in a violent embrace, images reversed like the negative of an ancient photograph. Sudden, violent motion, another sonic boom, a flash of white that blinded me even before the image had registered in my brain. Spikes, thorns, 2 heads butting together, 6 arms flailing, sparks flying, a human form and something larger, the sound of metal rending, the sound of something or someone screaming with a voice louder than the sirens wailing on the river behind me. The shockwave from whatever was happening on the bank rippled out across the river, almost tumbled my kayak, and proceeded across the water like a curtain of white spray. Then I was under the Farcaster arch. There was a flash and the instant vertigo I had known before. A bright light surrounded me through the flashbulb blindness, and the kayak and I were falling. Truly falling, tumbling into space. A section of water that had been far cast under me fell away into a brief waterfall, but then the kayak was falling free from the water, spinning as it fell, and in my panic I dropped the flechette pistol into the cockpit and grabbed the hull of the kayak, setting it spinning more wildly as it fell. I blinked through the flash echoes and tried to see how far I had to fall, even as the kayak went bow down and picked up speed. Blue sky above. Clouds all around. Huge clouds, stratocumulus rising thousands of meters above and falling more thousands of meters below. Cirrus many kilometers above me. Black thunderstorms many more kilometers below. There was nothing but sky, and I was falling into it. Beneath me, the brief waterfall from the river had separated into giant teardrops of moisture, as if someone had taken 100 buckets of water and hurled them into a bottomless chasm. The kayak spun and threatened to go stern over bow. I shifted forward in the little kayak and almost tumbled out, with only my crossed legs and the lashing of the little moisture skirt holding me in. I grabbed the rim of the cockpit in a white-knuckled, hopeless grip. Cold air whipped and roared around me as the kayak and I picked up speed, hurtling toward terminal velocity. Thousands and thousands of meters of empty, open air lay between me and the lightning-darted clouds so far below. The two-bladed paddle ripped from its bracket and tumbled away in free fall. I did the only thing I could do under the circumstances. I opened my mouth and screamed. And that is where we will call it for today. It'll be a bit of a gap between now and the next installment, a couple days, as opposed to every other day-ish. Thursday we should have something. We will continue this coming Thursday, February. What is it? 5th? 4th? 5th. Yes. So we will continue with the adventure of Raul Endymion. At that point. On Tuesday, maybe before it should probably be before I go. It's like, 45 minutes away to get to the optometrist. I'll have to keep an eye on it. I'm going to do a quick check over the recorded installments of Artemis by Andy Weir. In the relevant section where someone has indicated via YouTube comments that there is a chapter missing. If there is indeed a chapter missing, I will do a recording of that. I'll have to do that in the morning. When I'm winding up to do that, I'll leave a love note on the Discord, so if anyone wants to tune in while I do that, they can. I'll have to add some sort of a caveat being like, hey, this is with new recording equipment, so that's why it sounds a lot less scuffed. Hopefully people are enjoying the newer equipment that I've had for the last, since last summer. Last 8 months. Thank you, Nicole Berlino, for tuning in. I appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed. Other than, that absolutely horrifying segment where Sergeant Gregorius is confessing to Father Captain DeSoya, where it's like, what is one of the worst atrocities you can imagine in war? Well, going into the nurseries and killing everything that moves and doesn't move. In an enclosed space where there is no escape. Truly horrifying stuff. This is deliberate. And it sounds like DeSoya is somehow on board with this. Minor, not so minor spoiler. Minor spoiler, decidedly minor spoiler, and it should be clear by now. He is not okay with this. Neither clearly is Gregorius. He's not. Fret not. Father Captain DeSoya is actually a bro. He is a cool guy. He is a decent human being with empathy. Recurring theme, empathy. Interesting that. When we get later on and discuss the ramifications of what Aenea has hinted at, I'll, I have a couple thoughts and I have a couple thoughts and concerns of my own, based on my own personal outlook, based on that I'll bring to light and see if anyone else see what other people's ideas are. When we get to the end of all this, I would be interested to talk about it with people because we are going some interesting places here, some interesting philosophical places, and I think they are worthy of discussion. If people want to talk about it in the Discord, they can go right ahead. No time limit on that. Feel free to leave it in the comments. I know. Ooh, like, subscribe, and comment. I'm not going to ever tell you to like or subscribe. I'm never going to require you to comment. Do so if you want to. Do so if you want to give feedback. Otherwise, don't worry about it. I don't make money off these. So far, it's ad-free, is my understanding. It should be. I'm not signed up for there to be ads. I don't intend to do that ever. Eventually, I'll get a Patreon or something set up so people can throw me money if they really want to, but I'm too gainfully employed at the moment. Entirely too gainfully employed at the moment. It is sapping my will to live a little. It has made me tired of late, but every day that I have free, generally, I have tried to at least get a stream in when I can. I'm probably going to have to start making them a little shorter, because I do have other things I've got to do in and around and amongst. Anyway, we'll continue with this on Thursday. I'll try to do the, if there is anything wrong with the Artemis stuff, I'll try to get that done, since that's just like a chapter or so that I'd have to do, so I can do that pretty quickly. On Tuesday morning, my time Tuesday morning, it might be, I know there's people who are tuning in from Asia, so it's like a 13-hour difference. Or more for them. 13-hour difference or so, depending on what time of the year we're at. I know I've got some Australian listeners, so it's similar for them. And then, of course, the Europeans, who are quite a few of you, actually. Quite a few people in European time zones. And they're, 6 to 8 hours ahead, 6 to 10 hours ahead, or different. Anyway, with that, stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as per your preference or geolocation permit, and be decent to each other. I will see you all later. Toodaloo.